Hello, this is Karl-James on channel 01 to 1975. This is the archaeology of archaeology, variously looking at a number of archaeological sites and trying to compare changes in archaeological ideas in connection with excavation, what we think about archaeology, the differences in techniques and so on. I've been very amiss recently with doing my video logs, and I've lost large chunks of what I've been teaching to my students over the past few months when I haven't put them online due to various issues if you see my very recent video log. But today we're looking at Stonehenge. Stonehenge itself is a fascinating site. Great deal of enigma associated with it, and most of us will know at least something about Stonehenge. One thing in particular with Stonehenge is the way it's been portrayed and seen over the many years that Stonehenge has been on this planet. Even looking at how Stonehenge was created, most of us now believe that there was something at Stonehenge, some kind of site at Stonehenge, which developed into the Stonehenge site as we see it today, as far back as 6,000 years ago, 4,000 years BC. Let's look at this illustration in front of you. This is an illustration from the 1600s, mid-1600s, and it shows Stonehenge being a site that is being visited by antiquarians and historians, very much part of the landscape. A ruin that isn't really to be seen in that state today, because in the 1950s they variously changed it. One thing about Stonehenge, there's been many spoofs, many ideas, many changes, and yes, stones have been moved around with over many years to realign it with the various solstices, we should say, whether it's connected with midsummer solstice, 21st of June, or midwinter solstice, which is the 21st of December, or it's nothing to do with the solstices at all. You try and say that if you've been drinking a little bit, which I surely haven't. When you think about Stonehenge, you think of this monument as you can see in this image now. Variously well arranged, but this is the edifice that was finally rearranged in the 1950s and in the 1920s. Stonehenge has been mucked around with. Some believe the stone's been rearranged for tourists to look at. Others see the rearrangement is to rearrange it into what we believe the ancestors were doing with the site. One thing that is clear with the site from this semi-aerial photograph, fisheye view really, probably from a helicopter, is that the bank and ditch around the site was created well in excess of 5,000 years ago. It originally started off as a causeway and enclosure site. That ditch that you can see was a collection of ditches with little causeways in between them, known as a causeway and enclosure site, created in the Neolithic period as far back as 6,000 years ago in some localities and beyond that. Bodies would have been exposed in the centre as sky burials, and the bones would have been collected by their loved ones and placed in the ditches and pits around the outside. But that's another story. In 1797, Stonehenge looked like this. When I ask my students how you feel Stonehenge should look like, many believe that Stonehenge should be seen in this state as we see it in 1797, more of a tumble down state, more of a ruin. Some believe, on the other hand, that it should have been reconstructed and rebuilt in the 1920s and 1950s as it was. When you think about Stonehenge, you look at people's interpretation. Let's move on to this one quickly. In the northeast, let's say the top right hand part of this illustration, you can see something known as the avenue. Varying aligned stones, the heel stones, the slaughter stone as it's referred to, and so on. These stones were seen to be used for alignments. Whether it was to do with the solstices, we really don't know, but there have been some changes made. And whatever's being done at Stonehenge to celebrate the solstices is probably very distant from what the site was actually used for. looking at this plan quickly, the shape of Stonehenge in the centre, as you can see, the stones themselves erect, reminiscent of a very simple, very normalised roundhouse. It's likely that the builders of Stonehenge, building in stone relatively for the first time 5,000 years ago, were taking their architectural form from the form of a Neolithic roundhouse. This illustration, Stonehenge being built 1954, but yes, it was rebuilt in 1954, bits of it. Who's to say that these stones were deliberately thrown stat again? Who's to say that these stones, as you can see it today, accidentally collapsed? And what I was just about to say, what about in the past they were deliberately thrown down by our ancestors as the stone statues were thrown over at Easter Island? So reconstructing Stonehenge in the 1920s and 50s may have been quite naive, because the form it was finally seen in by our ancestors may have been partly the tumble down form, and we should not be messing around with it. This illustration shows the sockets as in the mortise and tenon joints, which this was part of one of the capstones on one of the 5 sets of trilithons at the site. This was reconstructed and placed as a capstone on 2 uprights, but we can no longer see how this architecture worked now, which has cheated us an opportunity. There's the work in the 1950s. Constable in there you go, Constable wasn't around in 1935. In 1835 drew us this illustration. Wow, this wonderful painting. Stonehenge is usually seen in this type of guise. This shows a ruinous state of Stonehenge, very different from what we see it today. Very unlikely that Constable was lying too much in his portrayal of the site. This is as it was in the 1870s, very much a ruin. That stone in the right there has been reconstructed from the 1920s and 1950s. Again, I feel Stonehenge, we've missed a trick, and we've missed a trick which we'll go on to in a short while. This is part of the landscape as we see at Stonehenge, very different now with the detour of that road on the right today. A ruin, as you can see it. Illustrations then leading up to illustration possibly around 1906 maybe. This argument again, Constable's portrayal on the left, as it was seen after the 1920s. Should we have mucked around with it is the question. Stonehenge is a ruin again from another portrayal, slightly exaggerated. This is Stonehenge just before it was really being reconstructed in the 1920s and 1950s. Those little white things there are showing what was referred to as the Aubrey holes, which were in the 1600s, 1666, identified by Aubrey the antiquarian. These Aubrey holes themselves are very enigmatic. It's believed that a number of periods the bluestones at the site have been moved around with this, and these Aubrey holes may have actually held wooden timbers. Reconstruction in the 1920s, and the trick that we missed, as one of my students, Rachel, mentioned, and I've used ever since, that we missed the trick of being able to see how the site was really built. If you're going to reconstruct the site, you should use traditional methods. Some say they wouldn't have had time, but let's use traditional methods to reconstruct the site. Some of these stones have very shallow foundations, and placing a capstone on top may have given them some security. The stones in the 1950s were cemented in place. The point I'm trying to make here is that we should have used the original techniques that we believe were used at Stonehenge. We missed that trick. Therefore, we don't really understand how this site was built. First aerial view, 1906, showing the site. Site eminently photographed and studied by many archaeologists. But one thing I feel that we've missed with Stonehenge is the ability to actually get up close. I have a trip with my students in December, we're unable to get up close to these stones, which is a bit of a tragedy, really. We could get up close if we managed to get there by 8 o'clock in the morning from South Wales, leaving at 5. But the whole point of this is as follows. By abandoning the very nature of being able to get up close to it, means that the site is a controlled piece of authority, meaning that people go and graffiti it and wish to damage it at times to put one up against authority. So by denying people, when they go to Stonehenge, after that period of 8 o'clock, which a party can go around it just before the site opens, and every other moment from then onwards, you're not allowed to touch the stones, denies our ability to touch the past. Postcard, this is really what you had, have now, a distance from Stonehenge, because you cannot get up close to it unless you're in an organised party before they open at 8 in the morning. This is what we should be doing at Stonehenge. Touching the stones, feeling the stones, appreciating the stones in their majesty. And this is what our ancestors 130 years ago were able to do, get a sense of these stones, enjoy them. And that is now lost. I love this illustration from the 1700s, this thing about scale, that the stones are actually drawn within the landscape, but the little figures of the people actually drawing the stones are actually made to look minuscule. This is a skill that they used in the 1700s, an artistic genre. But this is shown it as a ruin before it was reconstructed in the 1920s and 1950s. People prefer to see it like this rather than being mucked around with, as these people wished to see it back in the day. Stonehenge is to be seen within its landscape, and as one good thing about Stonehenge from an archaeological point of view, it's always been seen within the landscape. This appreciation within the landscape, being able to see all the other monuments connected with it. Stonehenge, devised as to be seen as many different things over the years and illustrated as so. That tumble down stone, some say that Stonehenge should have been reconstructed in the 1920s and 50s because of health and safety reasons. But then again, if anyone's seen Caerphilly Castle Tower in Wales, you will realise that that's not safe, but it's still there. Well, if it hasn't fallen down after 400 years, it's not going to fall over yet. And the fort wall at Burr Castle, the Roman fort, it's perfect. But that's at an angle, that hasn't needed to be reconstructed. You can see the reconstruction being undertaken there in the 1950s. Again, more of the reconstruction. And yet again, you can see that it's being, there's a bit of plaster of Paris and some matting on it as it's being set in the ground not to be affected by the concrete. Why are we having to concrete them in when our ancestors didn't need to? Less footings there today, but not much of a change. Again, more of this reconstruction. Reconstructions in the 1920s. When we think of Stonehenge, if you don't know there's reconstruction being taken place, it gives a sense of majesty, but when you know it actually spoils it a little bit. Do you agree? Ever thought out what happened with Stonehenge when it was being maintained? This old mower in the it's got to be the 1920s, hasn't it? The old hand mower. Thought I'd throw this in there. Yeah, proof, yes. 1950s pre-mix concrete being used to fasten in those stones at Stonehenge. There you go, a warder. Making sure you don't touch the stones too much. But that was in the day when you were able to get close to the stones. 1920s again, the reconstruction. This thing about Stonehenge and not being able to get up to the stones, I feel it's when you get festivals like Solstice, particularly the 21st. I've been to Stonehenge and I've seen people defecate against it, urinate against it, be sick, take drugs. One day of the year, the 21st of June, and it's almost as if people go there because it's seen as a sense of authority. That I've seen people jumping up and down on the capstones as well. Why is it that it's that reason? Because people do all that because they don't respect it. If they're allowed to visit any old time of the year, then people wouldn't disrespect her in a way, and I'd have that sense of respect. So have we done the right thing? Do we really understand Stonehenge? Barack Obama feels he did when he visited Stonehenge. But I feel if you're going to protect Stonehenge, you should have a decent reconstruction. This is one in America, not a decent reconstruction, but if you're going to try and get people to understand it, you should have had the reconstruction in one area and the archaeology as it is in another area, left where it is. And not have a reconstruction and archaeology at the same place. I think that's really what we shouldn't be doing. Moving on. Again, just quickly look at this illustration. If you look at the top one, that's wrong because there wouldn't have been barrows at the site before the stone circle site. So always question your illustrations when you look at a site, and usually archaeologists are making it up most of the time anyway. Stonehenge, people very lucky to be up close to the stones. You won't be unless you're with a group. People disrespecting the stone, C&D, because it's seen as authority. Get in there, put the C&D signs up there. If the site was open access, then it wouldn't be this way. Druids, the completely fictitious druids, wishing to feel that they've got a right to be up against the stones when they're making it up. And this is Stonehenge, use the word bastardized, where the grass was rifted up. Hardcore was let down so people could go around it. It really spoils it, doesn't it? But it's now laid over to grass, so they rectified this. People are still excavating at Stonehenge. There's been well over well over a dozen excavations since, say, the turn of the last century, and work is still going on. But then you get people wishing to link Stonehenge with loads of other weird things to try and explain it, like the astronomy. And leaving on this one, Stonehenge. Was Stonehenge ever reconstructed by slaves? The answer is no. People reconstructed Stonehenge in the love of it, and it was reconstructed over very long... Start again. Without editing. Stonehenge was built by people going all the way back 6,000 years ago. Stones being erect between 5,000 and 4,500 years ago. And people living the site and being in awe of the site. And each stone may have represented a family group, the blue stones, for example. Loads of theories about that, but that's another story. Anyway, thanks for watching my video log, and hopefully I can get on with my life and do more, being encouraged by my beautiful woman, and I know you'll be watching this. And as a tribute to everybody watching these video logs, and let's be able to speak and communicate. And I think you'll know what I'm talking about. Thank you.